Welcome to XYPN Radio, where your host Alan Moore brings you into a community of fee-only financial planners who want to profitably and successfully serve Gen X and Gen Y clients. If you're ready to get the knowledge you need from leaders in your field, learn from forward-thinking advisors, and take action on your own goals, XYPN Radio is the show for you. Here's your host.
Hello and welcome to this episode of XYPN Radio. I am your host, Alan Moore, and today I'm excited to have had Shawn Tydlaska back on the show as today's co-host. After our last episode back in 103, where he shares his career story, he emailed me a topic idea, and I ended up roping him to coming back on the show to talk with me about it. The topic he proposed is the focus of today's episode, and it's all about business metric tracking. Shawn was kind enough to give us a copy of his data tracking worksheet, which you can find the link to in the show notes. And we spent some time going through the various data points he tracks, how he tracks the data, and how often he reviews the data. It's so important to develop habits like tracking and reviewing data so that you can lay the foundation for running your business as a real business. I think you'll find this show really helpful for getting started on that journey. You can find any of the additional resources that we mentioned during the episode at xyplanningnetwork.com/114. Also, be sure to go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to join our private group just for XYPN Radio listeners. It's a community of advisors we've all been looking for that's there to provide support when we need it the most. Best of all, it's free. I encourage you to check it out. Again, that's xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP. Without further ado, here is my interview with Shawn. Hey, Shawn, welcome back to the show, man. Thanks so much for coming back on.
Hi, Alan. Thanks for having me back. I'm really excited to be here again.
So Shawn was on episode 103, where he shared his career story and sort of where he came from and his business. It is actually one of the most popular episodes we've ever had on XYPN Radio, partially, or maybe because of the title, because I think it's, how to get 39 clients in your first year, which is what you did, which is awesome. So good clickbait on our end. But I wanted to bring Shawn back on the show because after that episode, we've been going back and forth a little bit and around just asking more detailed questions from advisors on metrics and, what's your first year revenue and, what's your close rate on your prospects and all of that sort of thing. And one of the things that I'm finding is that a lot of advisors aren't tracking these metrics. And so I can ask a lot of great detailed questions, but if you're not actually tracking the data, it's not all that helpful. So Shawn offered to come back on the show so that we could just talk through just what metrics we find to be important to actually be tracking. And we're going to try to segment some of those around sort of when you're first starting out versus longer term, because they'll certainly evolve over time. But, more importantly, some of the various pieces, Shawn, that you're actually tracking in your practice and all of that. So I think it's going to be a fun discussion. But before we kick it off, I will say it will be helpful if you go to the show notes and open up the business planning tracking worksheet that we have posted there. Because Shawn and I, this is actually Shawn's template. And so we're going to be sort of talking through some pieces and referencing it. So it will be helpful if you have it in front of you. If you're riding or driving in the car, it's totally fine. You can look at it later. It's just a great template. So thank you for sharing that. So let's just sort of kick it off with what preempted you to even start tracking metrics? Like, was there a particular situation that happened, or is it just sort of your, by nature, someone who likes to data track various pieces?
I think kind of like my whole approach to my business was to be really intentional with like kind of having these projections and, with my original business model, I planned it out for 3 years. And I think it's really important to kind of track your progress to see if you're achieving certain benchmarks. And then when I graduated from business school pretty much right before I launched my own business. And that's where I kind of got the concept, or I learned the concept of the marketing funnel, right? You start with like your newsletter subscribers or Facebook likes, and then you set up these prospect meetings, and then from there you have your proposal meetings, and then from there you have signed clients. So kind of like how do people flow through that funnel? And then just also like it was really enlightening to me to kind of track my close rate and to see that it was, like I mentioned in the last podcast, it wasn't where I wanted it to be. And, advisors might not necessarily know what their close rate is unless they start tracking it.
Yeah, it's a great point because and close rate is just a great example of you don't know where you're at until you actually have a number associated with it, right? And is it at 25% or 75%? And is that high or low? It's a tough call because, some folks at 25% are going to sign on a bunch of the right kind of clients, in which case maybe the problem isn't your ability to close, it's the types of clients you're allowing into the prospective client interview. So maybe you need to screen them better before they get to your intro meeting. And if you're signing on a ton of clients, is it because you're really great or because of you're underpricing yourself or whatever? Like there's a lot of discussion to be had around it, but you don't really know until you actually have the numbers to evaluate it and developing those trend lines. And I think that's what's so hard when you're first starting a business, is that the initial wave of data for your first 3 to 6 months is not all that helpful sometimes, because it's like, oh, I went from 150 likes on Facebook to 200 likes on Facebook. Is that good? Is it bad? But over time, you start to see like, all right, I'm pretty consistent adding 50 a month, or we had a really big month thanks to getting quoted in a New York Times article, or it's starting to slow. What's changing? So it's both important from a here's where I am today, but also just from an overall trend standpoint to be able to sort of identify those and see the pickups and slowdowns, which are harder to see if you're just living in the day-to-day and not looking at your data.
Yeah, definitely. And I think for me also, and I think just as human nature is you want to kind of see how you stack up compared to other people. And I think that's kind of where some of this discussion came from was, what were people's clients' numbers at like 12 months or 6 months or 18 months. And that's kind of what's kind of been driving me and kind of the numbers that I want to hit there.
Yeah, it's a great point we recently did a benchmarking survey. We're actually going to be sharing that survey at our conference here in a couple of weeks. Everyone will get a copy of that report that's at the conference, but it's tough because we ask a lot of questions in there. And what we realized was not all of our advisors are actually tracking those data points. So, number of prospective client meetings, I would venture to say a large portion of advisors do not track that number. We sort of track that like 1 client a month or 2 clients a month or whatever that piece is, but they're not really tracking like how many people did I actually talk to? And for some folks, we all run our business different. I am, best way to say this about being overly self-deprecating, I'm just not a data guy. I like data. I don't like tracking data. I love looking at the data. So when I had my firm, I had a very clean P&L. We'll talk through sort of how we can do some actual budgeting projections and that sort of thing. I was very good on that side, but I could not tell you number of prospective client meetings versus number of clients versus any of these pieces. So a lot of this I have learned through working with Kitsis because he is a data fiend and our COO is just phenomenal at actually producing the data. So it's been a learning experience for me. And I can say on the back end, the data is critical because there are a lot of decisions that got made and a lot of decisions that we said no to because we had good data that we might have gone the other direction and made a bad choice. So I will lay the foundation to say, even when you're first starting out, start tracking the data. You don't have to be crazy about it. It shouldn't take you a week every month to get your data, but you can be tracking it as you go. And it will be very powerful for you long term. And again, coming from someone who is not naturally inclined this way.
Yeah, like when we filled out that benchmarking survey, I was talking to a lot of other advisors and they're like, oh man, I got to check my calendar for the last year of like what meetings I actually had.
I feel you. I'm guilty of the same thing.
So, and my tracking method, it's kind of crude and maybe people can like iterate on it. We'll share it with you guys. And it's something that I do every week. Yeah. Ellen and I were talking before this about like, there's certain metrics you want to track as you're first starting out and some that you want to track later, some you want to track on a monthly basis, some quarterly. And so so what I do to kind of remind myself to do all the tracking is I set a calendar reminder for each Sunday and it tells me 3 things that I need to track to fill out. So that way I kind of stay on top of it on a weekly basis. So it doesn't turn into this big project that you never want to address.
Yeah. I mean, and it looks like you use Excel or Google Sheets. Do you track any of this data in your CRM or is it primarily using Excel?
No, it's primarily Excel and Google Sheets.
Okay. And remind me, what CRM are you using?
I'm using a Wealthbox.
Okay. I'm not all that familiar with Wealthbox's data tracking capability. So could you track a lot of this, like, prospective client meeting and a date and actually export that data into an Excel sheet?
You probably could. I
okay.
Don't know. I haven't.
I don't know. It's nice. I will say we do a lot of our data tracking inside of the CRM, which we use we don't use financial planning CRM. So that's why I'm not sure about Wealthbox's capabilities, but it is nice if you can sort of have it all in one place, but when in doubt, Excel is king. So I don't think you can run a financial planning practice without being at least pretty decent with Excel. But maybe that takes away some of the, having to sit down and do it. And it's just sort of more of an automated inside of your various tasks and task list of, go put this piece of data somewhere so that it's available. But let's talk about sort of the overall data that you're tracking, and not to get too much into minutia, but like what, especially starting out, like let's talk about the general categories. What do you see as the important, categories that advisors need to be tracking and that you find helpful to actually have data on?
Yeah, I remember listening to some of your earlier podcasts, and it kind of really resonated with me of keeping track of your activity, not your results. Because, if you're trying to count the number of clients you get early on, it's just going to kind of set you up for failure. So the things that I kind of set out for were number of blog posts, and each person can set their own goals. My goal was 1 to 2 per month. And we also talked about, you guys have talked about on the podcast, just kind of having this regular calendar. And to be honest, for me, what I found was I tried to do that for a little while, and then I just got enough, lead flow that just kind of fell by the wayside, and I haven't really been blogging very, very often. But so that was one goal. Another goal of mine was to do one seminar per month. So I reached out to my local library and set up this financial literacy 3-part series. I've done some other speaking engagements. So my goal for that was to try and set one of those up per month. Another one I had was to do webinars. I think longer term, I want to try and do things that make personal finance more scalable. And I haven't done webinars, but that could be something, or vlogs, like doing a money minute or something could be something you track.
You make a great point that it's sort of two sides of the coin there, that you need to set a goal, and goals can change. So that's okay. Like you said, 2 blog posts a month, and then you're getting busy and you realize, okay, well, maybe it's not necessary, but you still need to at least sort of know the direction that you're headed. And then the second piece is actually tracking, that you are staying on track and having that data point. And I think it comes in, I guess, two of those pieces. One being actually having the metrics recorded in a Excel spreadsheet like you have. And then the second piece being put it on your calendar. That is the number one time management skill that I can tell, that I will tell anyone, is just, Wednesday from 3 to 5 p.m., have it on your calendar to sit down and write. Don't just make it a task, actually allot time for it, because that's how you're going to be sure you actually have the time to get it done.
Yeah, that's a good point. One older NAPFA member recommended earmarking 2 hours on your calendar to do working with the press. And so I blocked that out. Yeah, I think it was Wednesday from 1 to 3. And I signed up for Help a Reporter Out. And you get 3 emails per day about topics. And so it was kind of during that window that I would look at topics that I thought were interesting or that were relevant to me, just to kind of start developing relationships with reporters and starting to get your name in the press.
Yeah, that's probably a topic that we could do an entire episode on, is just time management and time blocking in particular, which has become a very popular topic. So we don't have to dig in too much on that, but it is important that, that you set aside time to accomplish your goals, but then you actually have a place to show you that, again, to record the data sort of showing goal accomplishment, we'll say. So marketing is certainly a big topic. Let's just hit the highlights. So I see on here you have professional development. So what is professional development for you?
So that was, kind of as you're first starting out, I didn't really know what people wanted in terms of financial advice. So I identified a list of, your ideal avatar, right? Your ideal profile of who you want to serve. And I just wrote down a list of friends and colleagues and people that I thought would meet those requirements. And so then I just kind of set up phone calls with them to say is this, what kind of financial pain points are you facing? What are you looking for if you were to look for a financial advisor? So I think in total, maybe I talked with 10 to 12 of those people as I was first starting out. I had a goal of meeting with professionals, and the way I define professionals is enrolled agents, estate planning attorneys, CPAs, because when I started my firm, I was new to the Bay Area. I didn't have a big professional network. And so probably over that first 6 months, I interviewed 10 to 12 estate planning attorneys because I wanted to find good ones that I would feel comfortable referring my clients to and that were a reasonable cost. I wasn't really looking at it for business development, that they would refer people to me. I just wanted people that would do a good job. I interviewed a bunch of CPAs, and I realized they're probably not the best for financial advisors because a lot the ones that are forward looking, they also usually do investment management. So I want to put a plug in for John McCarthy. Like he is really great. I send a lot of my clients to him, and he does this Q4 tax projection. He'll like do stock option analysis. He'll do the returns. And it's like, just from my research, it's just like a really reasonable price point. You guys can kind of shortcut that. But I think it's still important to like reach out to some enrolled agents or just people in your local network just to develop those relationships.
Yeah. So John McCarthy, who you mentioned, he owns Advisor Facing Tax. So we'll put the link in the show notes. AdvisorFacingTax.com does a lot of outsourced tax work on behalf of advisors. So you can send your clients to him, and he'll do the work either, I think, in a white labeled format, or he'll do the work directly with the client and then send them back your way. So awesome service.
Sorry, one more thing about the professionals. Like, when there's such a learning curve that first 6 months when you're starting out, and so I met with also like other XYPN advisors, and I was like, oh, who do you use for estate planning? And that's where I got some names there. And then I would set up like just like a 1 hour coffee chat. And, I learned like why you need the estate plan. Like, what's the will for? What's the healthcare directive for? It's kind of things you learn during the CFP coursework, but like, it's like a good refresher. And like, kind of, what does your package include? Like, what do you charge? How many, kind of like, yeah, just kind of building that body of knowledge. It was and so that's a good way to kind of, especially like kind of as you're starting out, you don't have a lot of prospect meetings, and it's a good way to just practice your pitch. Like, they're like, so what do you do? And then like the more you articulate it, even just professionals or like, just like friends, the more you start to believe it, in yourself. So that's good practice there too.
Yeah, I love that. The first time you say like, oh, I'm a financial planner, you're like, oh, wait, that was not what I was supposed to say. So I still struggle with introducing myself sometimes, but it's a great point that it's great practice. But again, this is sort of something that we're setting. I think listeners are going to see this sort of gets segmented into a few different areas. So really what we talked about up until this point, marketing professional development is very much setting goals and then tracking whether or not you are accomplishing that 1 meeting a week or 2 meetings a month, to be able to keep yourself on track. And if you have a business coach or a study group, you can bring up this data and say, yep, like I'm on track, I'm ahead of schedule, or I'm falling behind. And how do I, how do I get back on the bandwagon? The next area, which obviously is an area where you are very good at, based on our last podcast, and again, the title of the last podcast, is in the area of sales. So where do you start tracking sales? At what point do you sort of start tracking in the prospective client meeting, or are you tracking anything, before then, or is that really when it becomes important to you?
So, sorry, I just wanted to kind of, there was one more thing that I was tracking, was just meetings with RIAs in the local area. And that was a tip that you had given earlier. And I think maybe I missed it, that like it was specifically with NAPFA advisors or XYPNs, because I was like networking with like Experian, which is this massive RIA here, and also, like I mentioned, I was new to the area, so like I didn't really get success from other larger RIAs and trying to be like get their cast offs, because it takes time to develop relationships, and just showing up to these monthly FPA meetings, and it takes a little while to kind of get those referrals, and now I'm starting to actually get some from other referrals from other XYPN members, and then another NAPFA firm, they're going to have me in for a brown bag lunch just to kind of tell them about my practice. And that could be a really good source of leads going forward. But that didn't happen until I had met them, at an event last year. I went out to lunch with one of the principals, and then I just saw them at like a next gen event. And then they're like, hey, we should have you in for a brown bag lunch. So it takes a little while to develop that. So it's, and honestly, I didn't receive very many referrals from other advisors kind of out of the gates.
No, that's a great point. And we'll talk here in a minute about actually tracking where all of that is coming from. But so with sales in particular, are you mainly tracking basically once you have a prospective client meeting and how that goes? Or I guess what kind of data are you tracking around your sales process?
Yeah, so I count the prospect meeting as we actually have a discussion, like a formal, like 1 hour meeting. Like if I just have like email exchanges or a brief phone call, that like 1 hour meeting, that's kind of the start of my sales process. And that's what I consider like exploratory meeting, a discovery meeting. And that's kind of, that kind of kicks off my sales process there.
And then, so I do see in your spreadsheet that you have sort of second meetings, proposal submitted, and then client. So is that sort of your process, sort of an initial meeting, a potential second meeting, submitting the proposal, and then signing them up? Is that your lead flow?
Yeah. So about like 50 to 57% of people that have that prospect meeting have that second meeting where we go over a formal proposal. And that's the way I kind of position it, is like the discovery meeting is just all about to get to know them. And so there's like no pressure for them to commit to anything financially, but they are, if they do want to move forward, they are committing, some of their time. And then in that second meeting, I do like a quick assessment of their balance sheet. Like I tell them that I give them a little bit of homework. And so that way the second meeting is valuable for them. And then I give them the proposal of like, these are my fees, these are the services. And, I think just sending them a proposal after your first meeting, there's just still so many questions. And even going through the proposal in person with them, there's still so many questions that they have of just like, okay, when does this fee start? Or, there's just still so much that you need to clarify, and it helps to have that second meeting. And then from there, then when they sign to become clients, that's what I consider my conversion rate, is if I have that second meeting with them and then give them the proposal, and then if they sign up to become clients, that's what I consider my conversion.
Yeah, and if you're not looking at the spreadsheet, you can sort of imagine a funnel where the top of the funnel, if we start back at marketing, it's all of the various ways we bring people into the funnel. So that's Twitter and Facebook and presentations and, going to networking events and blogging, all those things, right? And so you're going to sort of funnel them in, and then you're going to have a level where they actually have some level of interaction with you. So some direct interaction, and that's really then leads to prospective client meetings. And again, we're getting tighter in the funnel as we get closer, because you're going to have a lot of people at the top of the funnel. And then we're going to have prospective client meetings, second client meeting, which is fewer, even, probably most of those get the proposal, and then the number of clients. And it just really funnels down to the folks that actually become a client. One of the things that I never did was I always viewed the prospective client meeting, and after you were done with that, they basically say yes or no at some point. Or many times the no is like, they never actually tell you no, they just sort of disappear off the face of the earth. But I always treated sales as a yes or no instead of a yes, no, or maybe. And that is something that Stacy actually is much, much better at than I am. So she's created this really cool tracking sheet that when she's talking to prospective members to join XY Planning Network, and I apologize, Stacy is our director of sales, so she's the person everyone talks to before they join XYPN. She actually codes when she thinks that someone will join. So, and I think advisors could take this as well to say, like, I think this is a client that's going to sign up immediately based on the conversation, or I think this is like a 3 to 6 month client, a year out client, or probably a never client. Because then you can actually follow up with them. So again, with a yes, if you just sort of treat it as yes or no, the yeses sign on and you never follow up with the no's because they're a no. Why would you follow up with them? But if you treat some of those no's as maybes, you can put on your calendar, contact, prospective client on this date to just sort of follow up and just see where they are, because they're, some folks just aren't ready for financial planning yet. And so that is an area where I have seen that, we both have the same sales coach. So I think Nancy has said 30% of sales are waiting for you to contact them. Like 30%, basically 30% of your prospective clients are just waiting for you to reach out and say, hey, how are things going? Are you still interested in working together? And 30% is a big number. So just having that formal follow-up process is huge.
Yeah. And after you kind of in that initial discovery meeting, kind of in that meeting, I try and get the second meeting set up. Like say something like, let's pull up our calendars. I usually have the second meeting 1 week out, and usually it's like the same day, the following week at the same exact time. And that's
a good idea.
And that second meeting's about 30 minutes.
Okay. That's awesome. Yeah. And then just stay in touch with people. And I know it's a little bit off topic, but just stay in touch with the folks that don't sign on. Kristen Herod, the marketing coach, she calls it prospect purgatory, which is your email newsletter list where you just sort of keep pinging them once a week or once a month with your regular drip newsletter, just to be sure that you stay in front of them and do some follow up, and probably be amazed at the number of people that you can pull back in. And again, this is an area where, tracking even a metric like date of prospective client meeting to date that they sign the proposal. that is a metric that could be very important for a lot of firms, because you can start seeing like, yeah, we're getting a lot of 2-year, once you've been in business long enough, like you've got this 2-year pipeline, because some folks are going to sign on immediately. Some of them are going to be longer term. And it's good to have that to be able to reflect back on as you are making tweaks to your process, particularly around sales, so that you can see, is your new process working or is it not working, and what adjustments need to be made.
And then kind of going down, further down on my spreadsheet. And admittedly, there's probably better ways to track all this. But I think when you're first starting out, just find a process that works and like move forward. Like for me, I didn't want to spend time to try and learn how to do this through the CRM. But so kind of like the next kind of level down on my spreadsheet is tracking where your leads are coming from. And, it just is really easy for you to just see like, okay, kind of just looking at mine, about 35% of my leads are coming from XYPN, and about like 8 or 9% are coming from Yelp. Initially, like my leads were all coming from, or a lot of them were coming from friends, family, colleagues. Then I was getting a lot of leads from like XYPN, NAPFA, kind of being online. And like now, as I've been in business just over 15 months. A lot of my leads are kind of coming from my natural market, what I call like warm introductions from clients or other professionals.
Yeah. And I almost wonder about splitting natural market, if that includes existing client referrals from like almost just over time continuing to parse that, right? So, because you had 29 people last year, 14 this year already. Again, just sort of digging a little deeper. But this is awesome to track. How do you find out where clients found you? Like, how do you actually ask that question and get meaningful information back?
Yeah, that's a good point. I can send you a link to this too. It's once someone sets up, a lot of times people would like just set up a meeting on the XYPN, find the advisor website. And then once I get that notice, I have a template in canned responses, like through your Gmail. And it just says, hey, blank, thank you for setting up some time with me. To make our meeting most productive, can you please fill out this info gathering survey? And so in that survey, it's like, their names, ages, income, some like, imagine it's 3 years from now. What does our relationship look like? It's kind of some of these primer questions. And then it asks like how you found me. And then I give them like a checkbox, because sometimes people don't really know. And so like they could fill it, they put it in during that survey while it's fresh in their mind. I know some advisors, like they ask their prospects where they found them, and they're like, I don't know, the internet.
Yeah, usually the internet. Like, oh, super helpful. Thank you so much. I will keep investing there. And this is an area where sometimes they don't know, because realistically they interact with us in, 7 different ways, right? That's sort of the old adage was someone has to interact with you 7 times before they become a client. And so if they read an article you were quoted in, they checked out your website, and then randomly they happen to be on xyplanningnetwork.com because they heard about us on some podcast, and they see you and they connect it back. Like, they don't remember that every single data point. Think about your attorney or CPA. Like, how did you find them? How did you verify them? Like, I don't know. Anyway, it is a tough thing to track. It's important to try, though. If it's all coming online, it's a little easier because you can do some unique links and tracking through your online scheduling and things like that. But recognize that it's not a perfect science, mainly because there's not a single lead source. There's probably going to be multiple touch points.
Yeah, definitely. And then you kind of, like I mentioned, like there were certain things to track as you first start. For me, I stopped even tracking like the number of blog posts or webinars or professional meetings, just because I didn't want to like feel bad about myself about like not hitting those numbers. And then they also just became not as relevant. So then I was more focusing on my sales funnel and those types of numbers. And that happened to me about like 6 or 7 months into my business.
Yeah. And again, marketing metrics are very important. That, you can get good tools, have Google Analytics on your website. You can ask good questions. We recently, I guess the beginning of the year, moved XY Planning Network to HubSpot, which is not cheap. Startup advisors should not even consider HubSpot. It is not necessary. And it does require that you be very inbound content focused in your marketing. But it is amazing the data points that you can get because we're sort of talking about like, where did the client come from? I mean, you can get down to tracking conversion metrics on particular blogs, particular calls to action on your blogs. We don't need to dig into that too much, but you can track some amazing data if you have best way to say this, if your marketing strategy is based on content and content conversion, which it sounds like that's sort of where you started, but it has shifted. So a system like that, not nearly as necessary or helpful if a lot of your clients are coming from introductions from existing clients and that sort of thing. But you can take any of these to a very deep level, and you can take it too far. So there is a point at which you just have to get your head out of the data and go out and find some clients. But again, all of this is very helpful to have. So what am I missing? So we went through sort of source of prospects. What else?
Yeah, so I wanted to just kind of mention my process for how I actually like kind of implement this. So I think of my week, I'm a big runner, so I think of my week starting on Monday and finishing on Sunday. And so I have a calendar reminder for each Sunday to do kind of 3 action items. One is, this is like my whole like marketing funnel. I call that my activity tracker. So each Sunday I go in and input all the numbers for like, okay, how many prospect meetings did I have? How many, kind of all of those numbs. And also on this spreadsheet that you guys can download, like it also has my mileage log. So if I like meet a prospect or drive somewhere for a FPA meeting, it'll give you a template for how to keep track of that. And then also, we talked a lot about time blocking. I kind of just left my calendar open so people could just set up prospect meetings, whenever they wanted. Kind of what I was finding was like I was kind of just getting overbooked, or not. I don't want not with just prospect meetings, but just like with client meetings as well. And so I look out the next few weeks to see like if I have a client meeting, I block off that whole day. Like I don't want to take on any more prospect meetings or anything, because like it's a lot of prep for that planning meeting, and then there's also like the notes afterwards. So the way I kind of created a workaround in my calendar is just to like set a all-day event and just say busy, and then no one else can book anything on my calendar that way.
And depending on the calendaring system, so I relied a lot on Schedule Once. I use Calendly now, but Schedule Once had a couple of features that were awesome. One, it did allow you to approve meetings instead of just being automatically put on your calendar, which was cool. But the other thing, and I think you can do this with both systems, but you can limit the number of specific types of meetings for the day. So you could say, client's going to book a planning meeting. I only accept one of those a day. Now that does not account for, additional prospective client meeting or other types of clients, other types of meetings getting scheduled, I guess. But maybe you could use like a buffer. I don't know, like they have like a drive time buffer in there. Maybe you could make it like 6 hours on each side. So like, you're never going to get another meeting that day. But it is a good point that, especially when you're using online scheduling, you do have to stay on top of your calendar and be sure that if you're driving somewhere, you actually have 15 minutes or half an hour blocked, and that you don't end up with 2 in-person meetings back to back without any gap to actually be able to handle that.
Yeah, I use Calendly for my scheduling, and I was about to switch to Schedule Once just because you can approve the meetings. Calendly looks a little more like modern and sharp. So I kind of found this workaround. And then the other thing that I'm doing is, when it comes time to have an update meeting with your client, it's kind of a lot of back and forth. Does this day work? Does this not? So what I'm doing is at the end of every meeting, even if the next meeting's not for 6 months, just putting it on the calendar for 6 months from now, because it's a lot easier to reschedule than to schedule. People's calendars are pretty open 6 months from now. So like, it's pretty,
that's a great point.
It's pretty easy to put it on there.
So are you finding that there are any data points that you tracked early on that you no longer need to track as you have gotten more experience, and vice versa? Some data points that you're now tracking that you didn't find were all that useful when you were first starting out?
Yeah, so I stopped kind of tracking blog posts because I stopped blogging. I stopped tracking like the webinars or vlogs. I stopped even tracking professional meetings and phone calls with the target markets, because I was just getting busy with running the business.
Any new ones that you're tracking that you've sort of added to your list?
Yeah. And that's kind of more on like the revenue and income side of things. But I kind of wanted to kind of transition to the, kind of like, like I mentioned, like kind of feeling bad about like not doing certain things or just not accomplishing some of those goals I set out. So kind of the monthly things that I like to keep track of is like a rap sheet. So, I have like a note on my phone, and I just kind of keep track of all the accomplishments that happen throughout the month. And I like how Kitsis calls these like big rocks, big things that you got done, like a new piece of marketing material, or you got quoted in the media, or you reached a certain like number of clients, like 10 clients, or paying yourself for the very first time, or hiring a business coach, keeping track of all those things. Cause then when you kind of like take a step back and take a broader picture, you're like, wow, I really did accomplish a lot of things this month. And so again, I have a calendar reminder at the first of the month to update my rap sheet, so take those notes, and I have a separate rap sheet of all the things that I've done thus far as a business.
I love that, because we tend to remember the negative comments and negative things that happen more than the positive. We know that, it takes twice the amount of gain to make up for a loss. So if you lose $1, if you get $1 back, we don't feel whole. We actually need $2 to feel whole, which is kind of just the way our brains are wired. The same way with negative and positive reinforcements. So when you lose a client, we remember that a lot more than the client that we gained. And again, like being able to look at the data, at XYPN Network, at the end of the month is when we offboard any advisors that are leaving. And it's just this like super depressing day for the entire team. And usually it's because someone didn't launch a firm, or they just decided wasn't a good fit, or they, we have some folks, our firm gets bought out. I mean, it's not negative. It's not necessarily saying we failed, but it still sucks, and you're like, oh, I can't believe we offboarded 5 people. But you can sort of go back and look and go, but we brought on 20 new advisors and we lost 5. So like, that's an okay month. And I do think having that wrap up is cool, to be able to go back and say, okay, these are the things I accomplished. Like, yes, there were some, I lost a couple of clients, or didn't get that client that I really wanted, but here's what I did accomplish. I think it's almost incentive to do more cool stuff, especially if you review this with your business coach or your study group. I always found this is very motivating, because nothing used to frustrate me more than when like everyone else had a long list of like awesome accomplishments for the month and mine was really short. So like throughout the month, like I got to do some cool stuff, so like I can say I did something cool. For me, that's motivating. Others maybe not.
And yeah, and that's like a good piece of advice just for someone who's even at a big RIA, if you're a junior advisor, or anywhere in your career. Because like when it comes time for your review, you're like, crap, what did I do these last 6 months? I knew I did something. So that's kind of where I developed that habit of just kind of keeping track of, what accomplishments you had.
That is a great point, that if you're asking for a salary increase, awesome time to have a long list of all the cool stuff you did.
For sure. The next kind of bucket of things I track are kind of on a quarterly basis. And I actually do this quarterly offsite retreat, like for my business, which is just me. Usually I go to like a campground or somewhere. There's a place in Half Moon Bay that's like a state park, and they even have like Wi-Fi there. So like I go there once a month, and I've read that like Steve Jobs and Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, they always do like these like big like think weeks. So for me, I kind of keep track of all these like interesting articles that I like to read. So I kind of allocate some time to that. A lot of it's like Kitsis' articles. And normally I just read the abstract for those. But also like as part of the agenda is like reviewing your business plan. And like I said, like I'm really intentional about like building this as like, even if it's a practice, like you want to build like a practice, I think it's important to review your numbers on a quarterly basis, and then adjust your financial projections going forward, and reviewing your QuickBooks reports, your profit and loss for the quarter, and like even drilling down into each category and seeing if things are categorized correctly. And each quarter I look at that and revise it. And then I write comments about like what were the major changes.
So you do that review quarterly. Okay. So I think that's an important delineation, that you are every week you're setting aside time to track the data, but then you're taking a separate opportunity, which is going to be once a quarter, to actually dig into the data. And I love that. I think that's very important, because you can get caught up in the minutia. You can see trends that don't exist, especially if you're looking on like a daily basis at, number of prospect emails or something. And you're like, oh my gosh, I've went 3 days without one. You need a little bit bigger blocks of time. So looking quarterly and taking the opportunity just to sort of dig in, understand the business, be able to look at it from a higher level instead of just from the day-to-day is huge. And I think that's where you're going to really get the insights around what makes sense for you, to any changes that you need to make for the next quarter.
Yeah. And that's like a concept I learned, not working too much just in the business, but working on the business, right? And like that's from like the E-Myth. Okay, so for like kind of the new numbers that I've been tracking, I think it's this was kind of like, I kind of wanted to hear this from each person that gets interviewed kind of going forward, is to just kind of hear like kind of what your first year revenues and expenses were, and kind of break it out also into like, okay, what were some of kind of the expenses you would have had anyways, right? So like meals and entertainment or airlines, kind of know what your net number was, but know what your like kind of real expenses were. So that's one. Kind of like how many clients did you have after your first year of launching, and kind of 2 years, 3 years, kind of all that. On the spreadsheet that we'll share with you guys, like the next tab is this like income tab. So this one's important because I actually like number my clients based on like when they signed up and paid their deposit. So, and some clients are like, oh, when did I start? And I could be like, you were actually client number 6. And they kind of like take some pride in that. So I keep track of like their upfront fee. I charge an upfront and then an ongoing retainer, their ongoing fee. And then that's good. So you can kind of keep track of what your average upfront fee is and your average ongoing fee. I track like people's date of births. So then you can quickly see like what's your average client age, because you get that a lot. Like who's like, what does your typical client look like? And this is a quick way for you to just say like, so for me, my average client is 38. I'm 36. I think there's probably just kind of some outliers that kind of drive that number higher. But typically my clients are like 25 to 45. But it's just kind of quick, good way to have that number there. I track the family income, so you can kind of see what your average income is. And then I have like the min and the max, so you can kind of see what the range of incomes you're dealing with is. The average family net worth. And a new one that I just started tracking, I'm like all about like trying to like show like return on investment for my clients and how I've actually made meaningful changes in their lives. So I just started tracking debt that I've paid, that have helped them pay off. So like student loan debt, credit card debt, auto loan debt, or any other debts. And it's pretty cool. Like so far to date, I've helped people pay off like $240,000 of debt, which is like a good talking point to like, these are like actual things that like you're really helping people with that are going to make a much more meaningful impact than like, trying to beat the market.
I love that. We've had a couple of different people on the show. I'm thinking back to Andre, who's going to be keynoting at our conference here in a couple of weeks, but where he talks about like dreams under management, and like that kind of thing, instead of just focusing on, returns and AUM. And I love the different point of view and being willing to say like, hey, who cares what our market returns have been? We've helped clients pay off $250,000 in debt. Like that's basically, that's the equivalent of saving $250,000 and probably at like 12 or 15% rates of return, because that's what their interest rate was on the credit card debt or their auto debt. So I think that's a cool thing to track. I wish there was a more automated way of doing it. And that's what I'm looking at. Like, when you have 100 clients, how are you tracking this? And there may be some ways with the CRM, but planning software is not kind to us when it comes to tracking progress. They tend to only look forward. They don't really have an aggregation for previous steps taken, so it's not the best. So it may end up being a little manual, but very important, information to have. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and for each client with their financial plan, I do a lot of my planning in Excel, and one of the tabs is results thus far. And so I track all the recommendations I make for them. And then they could see like, this is how much money Shawn has saved, or this is how much by working with him, or like, this is how much my cash flow has improved. I think Daniel Wren does a good job of this, of like keeping track of that and like kind of saying like, my average client, we've saved them this amount of money. And so like, I think that's the next maybe column I need to add, is like transposing all that data from their individual spreadsheets to this one master spreadsheet.
And speaking of Daniel Wren, I know this isn't a huge focus for you, but I did add to your spreadsheet here where I just said niche, yes or no, only because that will be an important, if you have some sort of defined niche, you're going to be bringing on clients that are inside it and clients that are not. And I remember Daniel's presentation from last year where he actually gathered a bunch of this data around sort of his niche and then the clients that were not in his niche. And it shifted his entire focus to the niche, because he was like, I make more money per client that's in my niche. I spend less hours with those clients. I help them in more ways. And that's basically what this spreadsheet would show is, because then we could start parsing the data and saying, am I better with my virtual clients or local clients, niche clients or non-niche? Is there a trend in the types of clients I'm working with? And can I help, you see that the value number that you're talking about, like if we could cross-reference that with net worth and income, and are we seeing that there's some bands that, you're amazing in the 50 to 100,000 income range, and that's just, you're just really great at providing value there, but you're not seeing the value at the 100,000, 200,000. I don't know. Like those are the things you think until you look at the numbers. And then that's sort of when you find out whether or not you actually know it.
And then I think the other thing that I keep track of is, once you have your average monthly fee per client or average revenue per client, like on a monthly basis, you can project out what your next 12 months would look like. So even if I don't bring on any more new clients, this is what my next 12 months would look like. And I only collect half of the planning fee up front, and I collect the second half after our second client meeting. So there's still, a few $1,000s that's out there that people have like committed to it, but like we haven't gotten there with the financial plan yet. And key point for me was like, when I got to the projected revenue of being able to replace my salary, right, from before I launched my firm, or like what I was making at my last full-time job. And that was like something for the rap sheet to put on there as well.
Yes. That is the day you go out and spend some money on a nice dinner. I remember that day well too. I remember like signing on some client and looking at the forward projection and being like, I did it, like I'm there, but required a lot more effort than it did just to go get a job, but much more satisfying, I'd say. No, this is awesome. So for anyone that is listening, go to the show notes and check out the spreadsheet. You may find that this doesn't exactly work for you and you want to play with it a little bit and just sort of tweak it. This is what works for Shawn and in his mind. Everyone sort of thinks about this stuff differently, but I think it's an awesome example of the data points to be tracking, because this is what you review quarterly and then annually, and you start to make decisions around it. Again, this is where you look at it and go, you know what? I've really got to just sort of buckle down and focus on my niche. I've hit my income level so that I can pay the bills and replace my pre-startup income, and now I'm going to sort of shift my focus because those clients are more profitable, or you may want to make some adjustments to your fees because you realize some of your early clients aren't paying you nearly as much. But one of the other data points that I hear some advisors track, others are not so great at it, is around just the amount of time actually spent with a client. So are you tracking time with client or time being spent serving a client at all?
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't initially, and then I started doing it maybe, like 4 or 5 months in. And especially like for one-off projects, I wanted to like know how much I was spending on this project and versus like what I was getting paid. Now I generally know how much time it's going to take to onboard someone for their first 3 meetings. That's, it's really about, for me, it's about 18 hours of time. Like once they sign to become a client, it takes about, 3 hours of prep, 4 hours of prep, hour and a half of FaceTime, and then an hour and a half of writing up notes, assigning action items. So now I've kind of got it dialed in, but that would be a recommendation, for you to do, kind of if you haven't done it already, is I think it's a really good exercise to go through. And even like my proposal process, that proposal process is not quick. It takes about like 6 hours from start to finish before they sign on to become a client. But like with the conversion rate that I've been getting, I've been happy with that. So I think it is really important to do that, to understand where you're spending your time, and if it's it's like a sustainable business model. Like, are you going to make up for your?
Do you have enough hours?
Yeah, exactly.
What system are you actually using to time track?
No, well, that was Excel as well. It was like, yeah,
yep.
I think there are apps, right?
I don't know of a great one. If any listener out there has a really great way of doing this, because we sort of need we need to be able to parse the data in 2 ways. You need to be able to see per client, how many hours are you spending? And then you need to be able to see per action across clients, right? So you can sort of think of this grid where along the top is all your client names. Along the left side is all of the, proposal meeting and onboarding and data gathering, all that. So you can see it both ways, because one, you could identify if you're spending a lot of time with any particular clients. And then you can also see, hey, my proposal process takes me 2 hours. What does it, how could I shorten that to an hour and a half? Are there templates or certain other systems or whatever in order to, to figure that out? So I'm not aware of any. I have tried a few different ones. I'm not sure if Rescue Time would be the best fit for that, but it's great data to have, because again, this is how you figure out, where you're actually spending your time. The one thing I will say, and I don't know how you feel about this, but like when I wrote my first financial plan, I think I quoted 20 hours because I was all hourly then. And it took me like 80-ish because it was my first one. And then the second one was 60 and the third one was 40. And it just got faster over time. So I don't know if this is something that's as helpful in your first 3, 6, 12 months as it will be longer term as you develop systems and processes, but it will certainly, it's a good habit to get into, and it certainly will show you areas of weakness, areas where you could improve your process because you're like, holy crap, I'm spending so much time in this one area. How do I streamline it?
Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, I mentioned this on my first podcast, like that, I was tracking my numbers and, I that's how I found out, like I only had like a 30% conversion rate. And I was like, I just knew that I could help these people. And that's when I reached out to Nancy Blakey to do her sales training course. Like if you don't track your numbers, you don't have a baseline for judge things off of.
Yeah. Cause I am guilty of, I don't want to say Chicken Little syndrome at times, but where like your most recent events weigh on you more than your previous events, where you go like, oh, I've just had 3 meetings in a row and none of them signed on. I'm a failure. And I think it's easy to feel that way. And then again, it's just being able to take a step back, look at the numbers and say, okay, where do things stand? Well, last week I had 3 straight meetings where all 3 signed up. So on average, I'm still at a 50% close rate, but sometimes we don't, I guess it's harder to go back and remember that. But you're right. It's hard to upgrade a process until you know how it's working. And that's really what the data shows. So, it's really what we're talking about this whole episode is just having the numbers and the way that you track it may be different. You can use Excel like Shawn does. You can rely on your CRM more heavily if you have some of those outputs, and probably something we can start researching around the different CRMs to see, how they work in terms of all of the various data points that you could be tracking. But, we look at our data at XY monthly, Kitsis and myself and Raul will just sit down and just hammer through the data. And we spend several hours going through, and just being sure that we understand the numbers and we see various trend lines and interesting hiccups and interesting accelerations. And we're like, all right, well, what caused that? Let's understand it. And it's so wildly helpful. And again, coming from someone who is not naturally inclined to spend the energy on the data, it is wildly beneficial. So any other recommendations as we're sort of coming to a close? Anything else that you've seen other advisors struggle with or succeed with that you're trying to implement, or anything else?
Yeah, nothing really comes to mind at this point. And just like a quick update for me, like we last talked like right around my 1 year, and now I'm up to I've had 49 families that I've done an engagement with, and I'm up to 33 subscription clients.
That's incredible. I'm trying to remember, you were at 39 and 26 subscriptions, if I am recalling numbers correctly.
Yeah, and so I'm 15 months in as we were recording this, and my average revenues just slowly crept over, like my upfront fees just crept up over $1,000 for the initial plan, and then just almost to $200 a month ongoing fee. So I feel like, at 6 months, like I didn't know if this was going to work, right? Like I didn't know that this model would work, but I really think that there's such a demand out there for this, and there's such a need for it. And I hope that, I can kind of be proving the model for everyone else that like that this can work, that you can build a business using the subscription model. And we haven't even talked about AUM. Like I don't even charge anything for AUM. It's all just a financial planning fee. Like I don't even track AUM as one of my metrics. But yeah, so like that, yeah, that's all I kind of wanted to say.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for coming up with the idea for this show, because this is not something I had thought about chatting through, but it's this awesome information, education, and encouragement for advisors to, especially when you're first starting out, you have the time, build out some of these various business processes to run your business like a business. Real businesses don't just like make decisions based on their gut and sort of fly by the seat of their pants. Like they use good data. I recognize there are not the best systems out there to track the data sometimes, but go ahead and get in the habit of doing this. And again, that sort of bleeds into then time management and being sure that you're being aware of how you're using your most valuable asset, which is your time. Especially when you're starting out, you're going to have a lot of time, but that doesn't mean you should misuse it. So it sort of all just sort of works together to be able to help you create the business that you actually want, which I think is the most challenging part of all of this. So Shawn, thank you again for the idea and for taking the time to come back on the show and share your various processes and such for data tracking.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Be sure to join our VIP community at xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP to hang out with other XYPN Radio listeners, ask questions for future mailbag episodes of myself and Kitsis, and to finally find a community of like-minded financial advisors. Thanks so much for joining me today. We'll see you next time.
You're not alone, and you're not crazy. It's scary starting, building, and growing your own financial planning firm. And that's why we put together a free private community just for you, the Cutting Edge Financial Planner. Go to xyplanningnetwork.com/VIP or text XYPN Radio to 33344 and join a network of thousands ready to change the lives of Gen X and Gen Y clients.